Some folks spend their whole lives waiting for respect that never comes. They sit quiet, swallow hard, and hope tomorrow might be different. But every now and then, you meet someone who decides waiting is finished. This is a story about a young Apache woman named Kaya, married into a family that saw her as less than the dust on their boots. They handed her garbage and called it a gift. What she did with that garbage, well, that's what I want to tell you. It happened in Arizona Territory, back in 1884, when the desert was unforgiving and so were the people. But kindness has a way of growing in hard soil. Pull up a chair. This one's worth your time. The gloved hand pressed the burlap sack into Kaya's arms. Margaret Hollister smiled the way a woman smiles when she knows exactly what she's doing. The parlor smelled of lavender water and furniture polish. Kaya stood on the braided rug, the sack heavy against her chest, and said nothing. "Wool," Margaret said, "should keep you busy." Catherine, the sister-in-law, examined her fingernails near the window. "Mother found it in the barn. Seemed a waste to throw out." The sack stank. Sheep dung, old sweat, something dead beneath it all. Kaya looked at the broken loom propped against the settee. 3 heddles snapped clean. The warp beam cracked down the middle. She had seen her grandmother work a loom like this, years ago. Different hands, different time. "We heard Indian women are good with their hands," Catherine added, still not looking up. The mantel clock ticked. A fly circled the oil portrait of the late Mr. Hollister. Margaret smoothed her gloves, waiting. Kaya shifted the sack higher, felt the burrs through the burlap, sharp as teeth. She nodded once, turned, walked out through the screen door into the October sun behind her. Someone laughed. Someone. If this story found you today, maybe it was meant to. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know who's gathering around this tale. As my grandmother used to say, a story shared is a story that lives. Kaya scrubbed her hands with lye soap until the skin turned raw. The sheep smell clung to her fingers, worked into the creases of her knuckles. She scrubbed again. The water in the basin turned gray. The beans bubbled in the cast-iron pot. Cornbread sat cooling in the Dutch oven, steam rising through the cracked lid. Outside, the sun dropped behind the mesa, painting the adobe walls the color of old blood. Thomas's boots hit the porch at 6:15, same as always. The screen door whined open. He hung his Stetson on the peg by the window. Sweat dark around the band. Dust covered his shirt, his forearms, the lines around his eyes. He stopped. His gaze moved to the burlap sack slumped in the corner, then to the broken loom leaning against the wall beside it. Kaya ladled beans onto 2 tin plates, set them on the table, sat down. Thomas pulled out his chair. The legs scraped against the packed earth floor. He picked up his fork, put it down, picked it up again. The mantel clock ticked. A coyote called somewhere out past the corral. The coal oil lamp hissed and flickered, throwing their shadows long against the whitewashed wall. "What's that smell?" Kaya chewed, swallowed. "Your mother's gift." Thomas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, the metal clicking against the plate. "She gave you that?" "This afternoon. Catherine was there." The clock ticked. 10 seconds. 20. Thomas pushed a bean across his plate, drew a line through the juice. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. "I'll talk to them." Kaya looked at him. His eyes stayed on the plate. "Will you?" Not a question, a fact laid flat on the table between them. like a card turned Vess up. Thomas didn't answer. He ate 3 more bites without tasting them, then stood and walked to the bedroom. The door didn't close all the way. Kaya washed the dishes alone, dried them, stacked them on the shelf. When she finally lay down beside him, the space between their bodies felt wider than the 12 miles to San Carlos. In the darkness, his hand moved across the sheet toward hers, then stopped, pulled back. His breathing deepened into sleep. Kaya stared at the ceiling, the raw skin of her hands still burning, and thought about the old woman who lived near the trading post, the one her grandmother had called the finest weaver in the territory. The mule's breath fogged in the pre-dawn cold. Kaya tightened the cinch strap, her fingers stiff, the leather creaking in the silence. Behind her, the adobe sat dark. Thomas would wake in 2 hours to find her gone. She did not leave a note. The mule picked its way down the ranch road, hooves crunching on hard-packed dirt. Stars still scattered across the western ski, but the east had begun to pale, a thin line of gray above the mesa. Kaya pulled her shawl tighter and did not look back. 12 miles to San Carlos. She had made this ride before for her grandmother's funeral. 10 months ago. The same cottonwood grove, the same dry wash where the trail crossed, the same red dust rising behind her like a question she could not answer. Her grandmother had been a weaver. Kaya remembered sitting on her lap as a child, fingers tracing the patterns on the loom, watching the shuttle move back and forth. She had learned the basics then: how to card wool, how to feel the tension in the warp. But that was 15 years ago. The knowledge lived somewhere in her hands, buried deep. The land changed as she rode. Ranch land gave way to scrub. Scrub gave way to mesa. The rock faces glowing orange as the sun climbed. A cavalry patrol passed in the distance. Dust plumes marking their progress along the reservation boundary. They did not stop. They never stopped. The smell reached her first. Pinon smoke, roasting corn, something cooking in clay pots, the scent of home, or what had been home. Before she married a white man and moved to a house that smelled of lavender water and silence. San Carlos spread before her wickiups and government-issue tents, cook fires sending gray ribbons into the morning sky. Children ran between the dwellings, chasing a dog with a torn ear. An old man sat outside the trading post, whittling something from juniper wood. He looked up as she passed, did not wave. Kaya found her near the eastern edge of the settlement. Nayeli sat on a blanket outside her wickiup, a spindle turning in her hands. Her fingers moved without pause, feeding wool onto the shaft, twisting it into thread. She did not look up when Kaya's shadow fell across her. "You're the Chato girl, the one who married the rancher." Kaya dismounted, tied the mule to a mesquite post. "My grandmother was your friend." "She was." The spindle kept turning. "Sit." Kaya sat on the hard ground, the burlap sack in her lap. Nayeli's eyes were clouded, the whites gone yellow with age, 70 winters, maybe more. Her hands never stopped moving. "Show me." Kaya opened the sack. The smell rose between them, sheep dung, old sweat, something rotten underneath. She pulled out a clump of wool, matted and full of burrs, and placed it in Nayeli's palm. The old woman lifted it to her nose, sniffed once. Her lips pressed together, a thin line carved into weathered skin. "Smells like sheep shit." They meant it to. Nayeli's fingers worked through the wool, separating fibers, feeling for the grain beneath the filth. A government-issue blanket hung over the wickiup entrance, faded red and gray. The concho belt around her waist was missing 3 of its silver discs sold. Probably, or traded for flour. Who gave you this? My husband's mother. White woman, yes. Nayeli spat on the ground. Not at Kaya. At the word. At the idea. At 400 years of history compressed into 2 syllables. What do you want with it? Kaya looked at the wool in the old woman's hands. Dirty. Ruined. Worthless. I want to make something they cannot throw away. The spindle stopped. Nayeli turned her clouded eyes toward Kaya's face, seeing something beyond sight. The lines around her mouth deepened. Her fingers rubbed the wool slowly, testing its memory, its hidden strength. Your grandmother taught you some. I remember. She gestured with her chin toward the ground beside her. Sit closer. Kaya moved. The morning sun warmed her back. Somewhere a child laughed. The cavalry patrol had vanished beyond the ridge, dust settling in their wake. Nayeli took Kaya's right hand and pressed it flat against a skein of raw wool, clean wool. Gray-white, soft as smoke. Eyes trick you, always have. The old fingers tightened around Kaya's wrist. Hands don't. Kaya closed her eyes, felt the wool beneath her skin, the tiny variations in texture, the way the fibers resisted, then gave, then resisted again. Something stirred in her memory, her grandmother's voice, patient and low, guiding her small fingers through the same motions. Feel it. I think so. Good. Nayeli released her wrist. There's a woman in Tucson. Shows Indian work to white people. Makes them pay for it. Kaya opened her eyes. Nayeli was smiling, a thin, sharp thing, like a blade catching light. But first, you remember what your grandmother started. The yucca root foamed white in the clay basin. Kaya plunged her hands into the water and scrubbed the first clump of wool, working the suds through the matted fibers. The smell of sheep dung rose, then faded, replaced by something cleaner. Nayeli sat 3 feet away, her spindle turning, her clouded eyes fixed on nothing. Harder. Kaya pressed deeper. The burrs caught under her fingernails, sharp as broken glass. One tore loose and drew blood, a thin line across her index finger, red mixing with the gray water. Don't stop. She didn't. By the time the sun reached its peak, her hands had turned raw, the skin between her fingers cracked. The wool, spread across a flat rock to dry, had changed from filthy brown to pale cream. Kaya stared at it, breathing hard, sweat dripping from her jaw onto the packed earth. Nayeli's spindle kept turning. Come back in 4 days. Carding next. The second visit brought the carding combs, 2 wooden paddles studded with teasel spines. Nayeli handed them to Kaya without ceremony. Like this. Her old hands moved the combs across each other. Wool caught between them. Fibers pulling straight and soft. Kaya tried. The wool tangled. She tried again. Tangled worse. Feel it, Nayeli said. Stop thinking. The third pass worked better. The fourth, better still. By afternoon, her shoulders burned and her wrists ached, but a small pile of carded wool sat beside her, soft as clouds. Ready for the spindle, Nayeli picked up a handful, rubbed it between her fingers, said nothing. That was approval enough. The third visit brought the spinning. Kaya's fingers kept slipping, the twist running away from her, the yarn breaking apart in lumps and knots. Nayeli smacked her hands with a wooden spoon. Too fast. Feel the pull. Kaya slowed, fed the fibers onto the spindle 1 breath at a time. The yarn still broke. She started again, and again, and again. The sun moved across the sky, Children played somewhere beyond the wickiups. The cavalry patrol passed in the distance. Dust rising, fading. On the 7th attempt, the yarn held, thin and uneven, but continuous, a single thread running from the spindle to the wool in her hand. Kaya looked at Nayeli. The old woman was already asleep, chin on her chest, spindle still in her lap. But before she had dozed off, she had pressed a bundle into Kaya's hands, waxed sinew thread, coiled tight. "For your loom," she had said. "The white woman's gift needs better bones." Between visits, Kaya gathered plants, chamiso from the wash behind the corral, its yellow flowers bright against the October brown, wild grape leaves from the creek bed, dried and crumbled into powder, lichen scraped from the rocks near the north pasture, gray-green and papery. She stored them in clay pots behind the adobe, hidden beneath an old tarp. Thomas found her there one evening, hands stained yellow from the chamiso, dirt under her fingernails. "Where do you go?" Kaya wiped her hands on her apron. "San Carlos." "Why?" "To remember what my grandmother taught me." He stood in the doorway, silhouette dark against the setting sun. His boots were dusty. His shirt was untucked. He looked tired, older than his 32 years. "You don't have to go back there." Kaya met his eyes. "I know. That's why I go." He held her kiss for 3 heartbeats, then turned and walked toward the barn. The loom waited in the corner of the adobe, broken and silent. Kaya worked on it after Thomas fell asleep, by the light of a single tallow candle. The flame threw shadows across the wall, her shadow, bent over the cracked warp beam, hands moving in the darkness. She salvaged wood from an old shipping crate behind the barn, cut it with Thomas's handsaw, the teeth biting through pine, sawdust falling onto her bare feet. She bound the new pieces to the old frame with the sinew Nayeli had given her, wrapping tight, pulling taut. The heddles took longer. She carved 3 new ones from juniper, shaping them by feel, testing the balance against her palm. The knife slipped once and opened a cut across her thumb. She wrapped it with a strip of cloth and kept carving. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. 2. The candle burned down to a stub. Kaya set the last heddle into place and stepped back. The loom stood upright now, still rough, still patched, but whole. She ran her hand along the warp beam. The wood was smooth, on Sunday. She would sleep through the afternoon while Thomas checked the cattle she had learned to steal rest when she could. Outside, a coyote called. The moon had set. The stars burned cold and far. Sunday dinner at the main house. Kaya sat at the far end of the table, hands folded in her lap. Margaret presided from the head, carving knife flashing as she sliced the roast. Catherine sat across from Thomas, picking at her potatoes, glancing at Kaya every few seconds. "You look worn out, dear." Margaret's voice was sweet as sugar glass. "The reservation air doesn't agree with you." The table went quiet. Thomas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Catherine's lips pressed together, suppressing something, a smile, perhaps, or a laugh. Kaya looked at Margaret. The older woman's eyes were pale blue, steady, waiting. "The work agrees with me fine." Margaret's knife paused. A muscle twitched near her jaw. "Work?" Catherine leaned forward. "What kind of work?" "The kind you gave me." Silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. The roast sat cooling on its platter, grease congealing at the edges. Margaret resumed carving. The blade scraped against bone. "Well," she said, "I'm sure it keeps you busy." That night, Kaya spun her first complete skein. The yarn was uneven, thick in places, thin in others, but it held. She wound it around her palm, feeling the weight, the texture, the hours of work compressed into a single coil. The candle flickered. Thomas snored softly in the next room. Kaya unwound the yarn and looked at it closely. Near the center, where the twist ran thinnest, a faint pink stain marked the fibers. Blood. Her blood. From hands that had cracked and bled and healed and cracked again. She touched the stain, did not try to remove it. Somewhere in her memory, a pattern was forming black wool. Silver thread, the shape of wings spreading wide. Her grandfather's shield had carried that image. She had traced it with her fingers as a child, sitting on his lap, listening to stories she only half understood. She looked at the bundle Nayeli had slipped into her bag on the last visit, 4 silver discs. Tarnished and old, cut from the broken concho belt. Spanish silver, taken from the dead, kept for generations. Her hands began to shake. Nayeli's wickiup smelled of cedar smoke and old wool. Kaya sat cross-legged on the packed earth floor, the 4 silver discs heavy in her palm. Morning light filtered through the entrance, catching dust motes that swirled and settled. "You gave me these last time," Kaya said, "but I don't understand how to use them." Nayeli reached into a basket near the back wall. Her fingers, gnarled and spotted with age, pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, silver thread, tarnished to gray, coiled like a sleeping snake. Dull in the dim light. "This is what you need." Nayeli held it out. "The discs, you melt them down. Draw them thin. But this is already done. My great-grandmother pulled it off a dead Spaniard at Cibola. He didn't need it anymore." Kaya took the thread. It was heavier than she expected. Cold against her skin. She turned it, feeling the twist of the metal, the way it caught even the weak light and bent it. "It's beautiful. It's stolen." Nayeli's clouded eyes fixed on Kaya's face. "Like everything else, the Spanish took our gold, our land, our people." She gestured toward the thread. "We kept their silver. Now steal it back." The thread coiled in Kaya's hand, 200 years old, maybe more, passed down through generations of women who had hidden it, protected it, waited for the right moment to use it. "What do I do with it? Whatever you want." Nayeli picked up her spindle, began feeding wool onto the shaft. "That's the point." The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours. Kaya kept the silver thread in her pocket, fingers touching it every few minutes, feeling its weight against her thigh. The mule picked its way through the dry wash, hooves crunching on gravel. A hawk circled overhead. Riding the thermals, the pattern was forming in her mind. Black for the desert night, she had seen bolts of black wool at the trading post, brought down from the Navajo territory, but she could make her own. The walnut hulls she had gathered would give her that color, deep and true, silver for lightning, for the flash that split the sky during summer storms, and underneath it all, the shape that had lived in her memory since childhood. Her grandfather's shield, she had traced that image with her fingers 100 times. Sitting on his lap in the old wickiup, listening to stories about the warriors who came before. The eagle with its wings spread wide, feathers tipped with white, talons reaching for something beyond the frame. He had died when she was 12. The shield had been buried with him, as tradition demanded, but the pattern remained. That evening, Kaya gathered walnut hulls from the grove behind the corral. The nuts had fallen weeks ago. their green casing split and blackened, staining the ground beneath the trees. She filled her apron with them, carried them back to the adobe, and set them to boil in a clay pot over a low fire. The smell rose sharp, bitter, like burnt earth. The water turned brown, then black, then a deep purple black that swallowed light. Thomas found her outside at dusk, stirring the pot with a stick. He stood at the corner of the adobe, watching. What is that dost die? For what? Kaya lifted the stick. Black liquid dripped back into the pot, thick as oil, wool. Thomas stepped closer. His shadow fell across the fire. You're still working on that? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. My mother asked about you today. Kaya kept stirring. What did she want to know? Why you look so tired? Why you keep going to San Carlos? He paused. What you're doing out here? The stick moved through the dye. Slow circles. What did you tell her? Nothing. Thomas shifted his weight. I don't know what to tell her. Kaya looked up. His face was half lit by the fire, half lost in shadow. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the past weeks. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he didn't understand. Tell her I'm busy. She turned back to the pot. After a moment, his footsteps retreated toward the barn. The design came to her in pieces. She woke before dawn the next morning and slipped outside while Thomas still slept. The ground was cold beneath her bare feet, the October air sharp in her lungs. She found a stick and sharpened it to a point with her knife. The eagle first. She drew it in the dirt outside the adobe wings spread. Head turned to the side, beak open as if crying out. The lines came easier than she expected, her hand remembering what her mind had forgotten. Then the border, geometric shapes interlocking like teeth. Then the lightning, 3 jagged lines running from top to bottom, black wool for the body, silver thread for the lightning, natural cream for the background. She stepped back and looked at it. The morning sun had just crested the mesa, throwing long shadows across the ground. The drawing stretched 4 feet wide, rough and unfinished, but alive. Footsteps on the porch. Thomas stood there, coffee cup in hand, staring at the pattern scratched into the dirt. What is that? Kaya's heart beat once, hard against her ribs. She had meant to erase it before he woke, had lost track of time. A design. For what? She looked at the eagle, its wings spread wide, its beak open. Her grandfather's shield, translated into wool and thread. The insult Margaret had given her, transformed into something else entirely, something they can't throw away. Thomas set his coffee cup on the porch rail. He walked toward her, boots scuffing through the dust, and stopped at the edge of the drawing. His eyes moved across the pattern, the eagle, the lightning, the interlocking border. Where did you learn this? From someone who remembered. He was quiet for a long time. The sun climbed higher. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the corral. It's good, he said finally. It's really good. Kaya looked at him. Something had shifted in his face. The tightness around his jaw had loosened. He was seeing her. Maybe for the first time since the burlap sack had arrived in their lives. She knelt and began erasing the drawing, sweeping her palm across the dirt until only faint lines remained. Don't tell your mother. Thomas nodded slowly. I won't. He turned and walked back to the house. The screen door closed behind him. Kaya stood alone in the yard, dust on her hands, the silver thread heavy in her pocket. Nayeli's words echoed in her mind, the woman in Tucson who showed Indian work to white people, who made them pay for it. Sarah Nez, educated back east, connected to buyers and collectors across the territory. She looked down at the faded lines in the dirt, the eagle's wings, barely visible now, the lightning, half erased. She had the design. She had the materials. She had the skills her grandmother had planted in her hands, now growing back to life. What she needed now was time, and somewhere in the main house, Margaret Hollister was already asking questions. The warp threads stretched tight across the loom, pale cream against the dark wood. Kaya ran her fingers along them, feeling the tension, the way they hummed faintly when she pressed too hard. The tallow candle burned low on the shelf behind her, throwing shadows that danced with each flicker. Thomas's breathing had steadied 20 minutes ago, deep and slow, the rhythm of true sleep. She had learned to wait for that sound, to count the breaths until they lengthened, until the small movements stopped. Now she could begin. The shuttle felt smooth in her hand, worn from use, weighted just right. She had practiced the motion during stolen moments when Thomas rode out to check the far pastures, thread through the shed, beat the weft, change the heddles, thread through again, tack, tack, tack. The sound was soft, barely louder than a whisper, but in the silence of the adobe, it seemed to fill every corner. She worked the black wool first. The dye had set well deep and true, the color of a moonless night. Each pass of the shuttle laid another line across the warp, building the base layer, row by row. Her back ached from hunching over the loom, her eyes strained in the dim light. She did not stop. 3 hours passed. The candle burned down to half its length. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the screen door in its frame. Kaya's hands moved in rhythm shuttle. Beat, change, shuttle beat, change. The pattern emerged slowly, black against cream. The first hint of shape appearing in the weave, when the gray light of pre-dawn crept through the window. She stopped, covered the loom with an old blanket, rubbed bear grease into her cracked fingers, a trick Nayeli had taught her, crawled into bed beside Thomas, her body aching, her mind still counting rows. She slept until noon on Sundays, when Thomas visited his mother and Catherine at the main house. Those hours were precious. She guarded them like water in the desert. The first week became the second became the third. The eagle's head took shape, a sharp beak, slightly open, one eye dark and fierce, staring out from the weave. Kaya paused one night and touched the completed section, feeling the texture beneath her fingertips. The black wool was dense, tightly packed. The cream background set it off like bone against shadow. Thomas stirred. Kaya froze. Her hand hovered over the loom. Shuttle gripped tight, breath held in her chest. The rope bed creaked, fabric rustled. She counted. 1, 2, 3. He turned onto his side, facing the wall. His breathing deepened again. Kaya exhaled slowly. Her heart pounded against her ribs, loud in the silence. She waited another full minute before picking up the shuttle. Tack, tack, tack. The rhythm resumed. By the 5th week, the neck had emerged, black feathers layered over black feathers, each row adding depth and dimension. Kaya worked the silver thread into the design, now thin lines, running through the darkness like veins of lightning. The thread was difficult, stiffer than wool, harder to control. It wanted to kink and tangle, to catch on the heddles and snap. She learned to feed it slowly, to keep the tension even, to coax it through the warp rather than force it. Her grandfather's shield lived in her memory. She could see it clearly, the eagle with its wings spread wide. Feathers tipped with white, talons reaching downward. She translated it row by row, adapting the design to the limits of the loom, finding new shapes that honored the old ones. The silver caught the candlelight, even tarnished. It gleamed. Week 6, week 7. The wings began to spread. Kaya worked them symmetrically, one row on the left, one row on the right, building them outward from the body. The feathers fanned across the warp in layers, black at the base, silver at the tips, each one distinct yet part of the whole. Her back screamed. Her neck had locked into a permanent knot between her shoulder blades. She rubbed at it during the day, pressing her knuckles into the muscle, finding no relief. But on Sundays, while Thomas was away, she napped in the warm afternoon light, storing up rest for the nights ahead. The loom demanded everything. She gave it. The screen door slammed. Kaya's hands froze on the shuttle. The sound echoed through the adobe wood, cracking against wood, loud as a gunshot. Footsteps, quick and hard, not Thomas's walk. Thomas moved slowly, deliberately. Margaret Hollister stood in the doorway. Her button-up boots clicked against the packed earth floor. Her dress was dark blue, high-collared, cinched tight at the waist. Her eyes swept the room, the bed, the table, the stove, and stopped on the loom. Kaya did not move. Margaret stepped closer. Her gaze traveled across the weaving, the eagle's head, the neck, the wings spreading outward in black and silver. Her face changed. The tight control slipped. Something moved beneath it, quick and uncertain. "Where did you learn that?" Kaya's voice came out steady, from someone who remembered. Margaret's lips parted, closed, parted again. The wings stretched across the loom, 2/3 finished, feathers reaching toward edges that did not yet exist. The silver thread caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, glinting like lightning frozen in mid-strike. "Thomas isn't here." "I know." Margaret stood motionless, her hands, usually so still, twitched at her sides. She looked at the eagle, at the intricate pattern emerging from the warp, at the months of secret labor made suddenly visible. She opened her mouth. No words came. The clock on the shelf ticked. Dust motes swirled in the light. Outside, a horse whinnied in the corral. Margaret turned, walked to the door. Her boots clicked against the floor. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. She paused at the threshold, did not look back. The screen door swung shut behind her, but the latch did not catch. It hung open an inch, letting in a thin blade of light. Kaya sat frozen at the loom. Her heart hammered. Her palms were slick with sweat. The shuttle trembled in her grip, through the gap in the door. She watched Margaret cross the yard toward the main house. The older woman's stride was different now, shorter, less certain. She climbed the porch steps and disappeared inside without looking back. Kaya turned to the loom. The eagle stared out at her, one eye dark and fierce, wings half spread. She picked up the shuttle. Tack. The sound steadied her, grounded her. Tack. Whatever came next, she would finish. Tack. But somewhere in the main house, Margaret Hollister was speaking to someone, and the door to the adobe still hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. The general store smelled of pickle brine and kerosene. Kaya stood near the fabric bolts, fingering a length of blue calico she did not intend to buy. While Thomas paid for flour and salt at the counter, 2 farm wives browsed the patent medicine display near the window, their bonnets bent together in quiet conversation. The door banged open. Catherine Hollister swept in, skirts rustling, face flushed from the cold November wind. She stopped 3 feet inside the threshold and stared directly at Kaya. There she is. The farm wives looked up. The shopkeeper's hand paused over the cash drawer. Thomas turned slowly, a sack of flour in his arms. Catherine's voice carried through the store, sharp and clear. She's doing something in that shed of hers. Thomas, heathen rituals, I've seen the smoke. Mother's seen what she's making. Kaya's fingers tightened on the calico. The fabric bunched in her grip. Catherine, Thomas's voice was low. This isn't the place. Then where is the place? Catherine stepped closer, her button-up boots clicking against the wooden floor. Mother saw it. That thing she's making. Symbols and patterns, pagan work. Devil's work. The farm wives exchanged glances. One of them, a heavy woman in a gray dress, made the sign of the cross. Lord have mercy, she muttered. Kaya set down the calico. Her hands were steady. Her face was still, but beneath her ribs, something coiled tight. It's a blanket, she said. Catherine laughed a short, ugly sound. A blanket, with savage markings, made at night, in secret, while my brother sleeps. She turned to the farm wives, drawing them in like witnesses at a trial. What would you call that? The heavy woman shook her head. The other one, younger, with a pinched mouth, took a step back from Kaya, as if whatever she had might spread. Thomas. Kaya looked at her husband. He stood frozen near the counter, flour sack clutched to his chest, face drained of color. Tell them what it is. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Catherine smiled. He can't tell them, because he doesn't know. None of us know what you're doing out there, what you're bringing into our family, what kind of... That's enough. Thomas's voice cracked on the second word. But he did not move toward Kaya, did not step between her and his sister, did not say the one thing that mattered, that she was his wife. And he believed her. The shopkeeper coughed. Maybe this conversation should happen somewhere else. Folks. No one moved. Kaya walked toward the door. Each step felt like wading through deep water. The farm wives parted to let her pass, their skirts drawing back as if she carried disease. The younger one whispered something to the older one. The older one nodded, outside. The November wind bit at her face. Kaya stepped off the boardwalk, and her boot sank into the mud thick. Black mud churned up by wagon wheels and horse hooves. She pulled her foot free, stepped again, sank deeper. Thomas emerged 5 minutes later. He loaded the supplies into the wagon bed without speaking, climbed up beside her, took the reins. They drove in silence. The road stretched ahead, rutted and brown, winding between hills dotted with scrub oak. A hawk circled overhead. Riding the thermals, the wagon wheels creaked and groaned, spattering mud up onto Kaya's skirt. Her hands, the sight of her face. You didn't say anything. Thomas's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed fixed on the road. What was I supposed to say? That it's a blanket. That I'm your wife, that Catherine is wrong. He was quiet for a long moment. The reins hung slack in his hands. The mule plodded forward, knowing the way home. I don't know what to think anymore. Kaya turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the gray sky, the straight nose, the stubbled jaw, the eyes that refused to meet hers, its wool and thread. Thomas, nothing more. Then why hide it? She had no answer he would understand. The wagon lurched through a deep rut, and more mud splashed up. cold and wet against her cheek. She did not wipe it away. They drove the rest of the way without speaking. The adobe door hung open. Kaya saw it from 30 yards away, the dark gap where the screen should have been latched. The way the afternoon light fell wrong across the threshold. Her stomach dropped. She jumped from the wagon before it stopped moving. Her boots hit the mud, and she ran. The loom lay on its side. Threads tangled across the floor like spilled entrails. Black and silver and cream twisted together in knots. The warp beam had cracked again, not broken clean through, but split along the grain, the wood showing pale where the damage ran. The eagle stared up at her from the fallen weaving. One wing crumpled against the packed earth. The other stretched toward the wall. Kaya's knees buckled. She went down hard, palms slapping against the floor. Mud from her boots smeared across the packed earth, mixing with the dust, streaking brown across the fallen threads. She crawled forward on hands and knees, reaching for the tangled weave, pulling it toward her. Not broken, tangled, but not broken. Her fingers shook as she worked at the first knot. The silver thread had kinked badly, twisted back on itself in 3 places. She tugged at it, gentle, coaxing. The knot held. She pulled harder. The thread bit into her fingers, leaving red marks across the skin. The knot tightened. A sound came out of her low. Animal. Nothing like her voice. She pressed her forehead against the fallen loom and breathed through her teeth. The mud on her face dried and cracked. The mud on her skirt soaked through to her skin, cold and heavy. Thomas's boots appeared in the doorway. She heard him stop, heard the sharp intake of breath. Kaya, don't. He didn't move, didn't come closer, didn't leave. The light shifted as the sun dropped lower. Shadows lengthened across the floor. The dust motes settled. Thomas eventually left. She heard his footsteps retreat across the yard, heard the barn door open and close. The sounds of evening chores filtered through the walls, water sloshing, the mule snorting, chickens settling into the coop. Kaya stayed on the floor. The cold crept in as darkness fell. She did not light a candle, did not move to start a fire. The adobe held the night's chill like a stone cellar, and her breath began to fog in the air. The mud on her clothes had stiffened, pulling at her skin when she moved. She worked at the knots by feel, one by one. Silver thread, black wool, cream warp, each one loosened, untangled, straightened, her hands cramped, her fingers bled in 2 places. The skin cracked from months of work and now torn fresh. She kept going. Midnight passed. The stars wheeled overhead, visible through the gap in the door. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, and another answered. The first gray light of dawn touched the window. Kaya looked down at her hands. The threads lay across her lap, untangled now, ready to be rewoven. The cracked warp beam could be bound with sinew. The heddles were intact. The eagle, crumpled but whole, waited to be lifted back onto the frame. "Not yet," she whispered. Her voice was raw, cracked from cold and silence. "Not yet." She pushed herself up from the floor. Her legs shook. Her back screamed. Her hands left bloody smears on the wood of the loom as she gripped it and pulled it upright. The eagle hung crooked on the warp, one wing higher than the other. But it hung. It held. Someone had done this. Someone had come into her home, touched her work, tried to destroy what she was building. Margaret, Catherine, a hired hand following orders. It didn't matter. What mattered was the decision forming in her chest, hard and cold as the mud drying on her skin. She would finish, and she would never ask permission again. The last row took 3 hours. Kaya's fingers moved through the warp, threading the shuttle, beating the weft, threading again, the black wool packed tight against the silver. The eagle's talons reached downward, each claw distinct, each feather layered over the one before, outside. The cottonwood leaves had turned gold and begun to fall. Late November had come to the territory, bringing cold mornings and shorter days. Kaya worked by lamplight now, the coal oil flame steady against the darkness. Tack. The shuttle passed through. Tack. One more row. Tack. Done. She set down the shuttle. Her hands trembled. Her shoulders ached from months of hunching over the loom, and her eyes burned from strain. But the blanket hung complete before her, 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, black and silver and cream woven together into something that had not existed before. The eagle spread its wings across the center, head turned, beak open. Lightning bolts ran down both sides, silver thread catching the lamplight, the border interlocked in geometric patterns, old designs she had traced on her grandfather's shield when she was a child. Kaya stood and stepped back, looked at what she had made. The loom creaked softly as the weight of the blanket pulled against the frame. The flame flickered. The shadows danced. She did not smile, did not weep, simply stood and looked, her raw hands hanging at her sides. Nayeli arrived 3 days later. Kaya heard the wagon before she saw it, wheels grinding over the dirt road, horses snorting in the cold air. She walked out to the yard and watched the old woman climb down from the seat, moving slowly, one hand gripping the sideboard for balance. A young man held her elbow, her great-nephew, the one who had written the letter to Tucson on her behalf. "You came. Said I would." Nayeli straightened, wincing. The 12-mile journey had cost her. Her face was gray with exhaustion, and she leaned heavily on a juniper walking stick. "Where is it?" Kaya led her inside. The blanket hung on the loom. Finished. Waiting. Morning light streamed through the window and caught the silver thread, making it flash and shimmer. Nayeli stopped in the doorway. Her clouded eyes moved across the pattern, the eagle, the lightning, the border. She said nothing. Kaya waited. Her heart beat against her ribs, slow and heavy. The old woman's silence stretched on. Nayeli stepped forward. Her gnarled fingers reached out and touched the eagle's head, tracing the beak, the eye, the layered feathers of the neck. Her hand moved down to the wings, feeling the texture of the weave, the density of the black wool against the cream background. She touched the silver lightning, rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger. Kaya's throat tightened. "Is that good?" Nayeli turned to face her. The clouded eyes held something Kaya could not name. "It's done. That's what matters." She pulled a bundle of cedar from her bag, dried branches tied with sinew. "Light this." Kaya found matches, struck one, held the flame to the cedar until it caught, then smoked, filling the adobe with sharp, clean scent. Nayeli waved the smoke over the blanket, muttering words in the old language. Kaya caught fragments, prayers for protection, for strength, for the spirit of the eagle to live in the thread. The smoke curled upward, wrapping around the loom, the blanket, the 2 women standing before it. When the cedar burned down to ash, Nayeli set it aside. The woman in Tucson wrote back, "My nephew read me the letter." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, creased and worn from travel. "She wants to see it. The letter arrived the same day Nayeli left. Kaya recognized the handwriting on the envelope, careful, educated, precise. Sarah Nez. She opened it with trembling hands. Mrs. Hollister, I have heard about your work from Nayeli Chato. The Arizona Territorial Fair opens in Tucson on December 15th. I am organizing an exhibition of native craftsmanship. If your blanket is as remarkable as described, I would like to display it. Enclosed is a stage ticket. Come alone. Bring the blanket. Sarah Nez. Kaya read the letter 3 times. The stage ticket fell out a printed slip of paper. Hollister Ranch to Tucson. December 12th. 3 days away. Thomas found her packing that evening. He stood in the doorway of the adobe, watching as she folded the blanket into a canvas sack. Careful not to crease the weave, his face was unreadable. Where are you going here? Tucson. Alone. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. The lamp flickered between them, casting shadows across his face. My mother won't like it. Kaya tied the sack closed. I know. Catherine will talk. She already talks. Thomas stepped inside, his boots scuffed against the packed earth floor. He stopped 3 feet from her, hands hanging at his sides. What's in Tucson? Kaya looked at him. His eyes were tired, but something had shifted in them over the past weeks. The defensive tightness had loosened, replaced by something closer to curiosity or respect. A chance, she said. He nodded slowly, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of bills, $15, maybe more. For the stage and food. Kaya took the money. Their fingers brushed. He did not pull away. Thank you. Don't thank me. He turned toward the door, paused. Just come back. The Tucson exhibition hall smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. Gas chandeliers hung from the ceiling, filling the space with yellow light. Kaya stood near the entrance. The canvas sack clutched to her chest and tried to breathe. Voices echoed off the adobe walls. Men in suits examined pottery displays. Women in silk dresses clustered around jewelry tables. Territorial flags hung from the rafters, red and gold against the whitewashed beams. Mrs. Hollister, a woman approached, tall, dark-skinned, dressed in a blue wool suit that would not have looked out of place in Boston or Philadelphia. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and silver earrings glinted at her lobes. I'm Sarah Nez. You came. I came. Sarah's eyes dropped to the canvas sack. May I? Kaya handed it over. Sarah carried the sack to a display table near the center of the hall. She untied the canvas slowly, carefully, and lifted the blanket free. The hall went quiet. The eagle spread its wings across the table, black and silver against cream. Feathers layered, lightning bolts running down both sides. The gaslight caught the silver thread and made it blaze. Sarah held up one corner. A young native woman in traditional dress stepped forward, and Sarah draped the blanket across her shoulders. The model walked to the center of the floor, turned. The eagle's wings spread wide. The talons reached downward. The silver lightning flashed with each movement. The crowd watched in silence, men lowering their champagne glasses, women forgetting their conversations, even the children going still. The model stopped. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then someone began to clap. 1 person, then 2, then 10. Then the entire hall, a wave of applause rolling through the space, echoing off the walls, building into something that shook the chandeliers. Kaya stood frozen near the entrance. Her hands shook, her eyes burned. The sound washed over her like water, like wind, like something she had never heard before. Sarah appeared beside her. "There's a reporter from the Territorial Enterprise. He wants to know who made it." Kaya looked at the blanket, at the eagle spreading its wings in the gaslight, at the crowd still standing, still clapping. "Tell him. He wants to hear it from you." The reporter approached a thin man with spectacles and a pencil behind his ear. His notebook was open, ready. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Kaya straightened. Her hands stopped shaking. "Kaya Hollister. Write it down." The reporter scribbled. "And the design, where does it come from?" "My grandfather, my grandmother, my people." He kept writing. The applause had faded now, but people still stood near the display, pointing, talking, examining the weave. A man in a gray suit was speaking to Sarah, gesturing toward the blanket, reaching for his wallet. Kaya watched it all from across the room. The eagle stared back at her, black and silver, fierce and alive. She had done it, but somewhere outside the exhibition hall, the stage back to Hollister Ranch was already boarding, and waiting at home was a family that had tried to destroy what now hung in the center of this room. The stage rolled into the Hollister Ranch at 4 p.m. Dust rose behind the wheels and settled on the porch where Margaret sat, a newspaper folded in her lap. Kaya climbed down from the coach. The canvas sack hung across her shoulder, the blanket inside, heavier now with the weight of what had happened in Tucson. She walked across the yard, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth, and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Margaret did not stand. Her hair was pinned back in its usual tight bun. Her dress was dark gray, buttoned to the throat. But something had changed in the way she held herself. The rigid posture had softened, the sharp angles of her shoulders rounded slightly inward. "The paper came." Kaya set down the sack. "I know. You're in it." Margaret unfolded the newspaper. The front page showed a grainy photograph, Kaya standing beside the blanket. The eagle's wings spread wide behind her. The headline read, "Indian Woman's Blanket Wins Praise at Territorial Fair." "I know." Silence stretched between them. The wind stirred the cottonwood branches overhead. Bare now. The last leaves scattered across the yard. A horse whinnied in the corral. Margaret looked at the photograph for a long moment. Her lips pressed together, then relaxed. Her fingers smoothed the edge of the paper. "It's well made." Kaya said nothing. The words hung in the air, not an apology, not a welcome, but something else, an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall that had stood between them for 9 months. Margaret refolded the newspaper and set it on the porch rail. She did not meet Kaya's eyes. "Catherine won't be visiting for a while. The women at church have been talking about what she said at the store." Kaya picked up the sack, climbed the steps, walked past Margaret and through the screen door without looking back. Thomas waited inside. He stood near the window, silhouette dark against the afternoon light. His hat was off, his hair mussed, his hands hanging at his sides. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has only just begun to see. "You came back. I said I would." He stepped forward, stopped. His jaw worked, the muscle twitching beneath the skin. "I should have said something. Back then, at the store, before all of it." Kaya set the sack on the table. The canvas rustled, the blanket shifted inside. "Back then is gone." "I know." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. His eyes were wet at the edges, red-rimmed, tired. He was not the same man who had stood silent while his sister called her a heathen witch. Something had broken in him, and something else had started to grow. You're saying it now. She walked past him, into the bedroom, and closed the door. Spring came slowly to the territory. The cottonwoods budded in late March, pale green shoots pushing through the gray bark. The creek behind the ranch swelled with snowmelt from the mountains, running fast and cold over the stones. Wildflowers bloomed in patches across the mesa, yellow chamiso, purple sage, white yucca blossoms reaching toward the sun. A year had passed since the exhibition in Tucson. Sarah Nez had sold the eagle blanket to a collector in Santa Fe for $200 more money than Kaya had ever held in her hands. She had used it to buy wool, dyes, and 3 looms from a trader passing through from Navajo territory. The old barn stood at the edge of the property, 50 yards from the main house. Kaya had cleaned it out herself, hauling away broken tools and rotted hay, scrubbing the walls with lye soap until the wood showed pale beneath the grime. Thomas had helped her whitewash the interior, working side by side without speaking, brushes moving in steady rhythm. Now 3 looms stood in a row beneath the high windows. Wool hung drying on wooden racks along the east wall, black from walnut hulls, red from madder root, yellow from chamiso flowers. Spindles and shuttles lined the shelves, carved from juniper and pine, polished smooth from use. Amma sat at the first loom. She was 16, thin as a willow switch, her black hair braided down her back. Her hands moved steadily through the warp, feeding wool onto the shuttle, beating the weft into place. The pattern emerging beneath her fingers was simple stripes of black and cream, but the tension was even, the edges straight. Luyu worked at the second loom, older than Amma, maybe 20, with broad shoulders and calloused hands. She had walked 12 miles from San Carlos to ask Kaya for work, carrying nothing but a blanket roll and a determination that showed in the set of her jaw. Her weaving was rough but improving daily. Pilar sat at the third loom, the youngest of the 3, barely 14. She had been sent by her mother, a widow with 6 children and no way to feed them all. Her fingers fumbled sometimes, and she cried when she made mistakes, but she came back every morning, and that was what mattered. The shuttles clicked in unison, tack, 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 3 rhythms overlapping, filling the barn with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Kaya stood in the doorway, watching. Nayeli arrived in late April. The wagon rolled up the dirt road slowly, wheels creaking, horses plodding. Her great-nephew drove, the same young man who had brought her to bless the blanket a year ago. He helped her down from the seat with both hands, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. She weighed nothing now, bones and skin and little else. Her clouded eyes had gone milky white, and her hands trembled even when she held them still. "Show me." Kaya led her into the barn. The 3 girls stopped their work. They stood as Nayeli entered, heads bowed, hands clasped before them. They knew who she was. Everyone at San Carlos knew. Nayeli walked slowly between the looms, her walking stick tapping against the packed earth floor. She stopped at Amma's weaving and reached out, touching the stripes, feeling the tension of the warp. "Good." She moved to Luyu's loom, ran her fingers across the half-finished blanket, nodded. At Pilar's station. She paused longer. The girl's weaving was uneven, the edges wobbly. Nayeli touched it anyway, her gnarled fingers tracing the pattern. "You'll learn." Pilar's eyes filled with tears. She nodded without speaking. Nayeli turned to face the back wall. The eagle blanket hung there, framed in pine that Thomas had cut and sanded himself. The black and silver glinted in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Kaya had bought it back from the collector in Santa Fe. Paying twice what he had paid Sarah Nez, it watched over the workshop now, wings spread, talons reaching. Nayeli stood before it for a long time. How many now? Kaya stepped up beside her. 3. More coming next month. The old woman nodded. Her lips moved slightly, shaping words in the old language, a prayer, perhaps, or a blessing. Good. She turned away from the blanket, walked toward the door. Kaya followed, matching her slow pace, ready to catch her if she stumbled. At the threshold, Nayeli stopped. The afternoon sun slanted across the yard, painting the adobe walls gold. The mesa rose in the distance, red rock glowing against the blue sky. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Now they know we're still here. Kaya looked at the old woman, at the clouded eyes, the weathered skin, the hands that had taught her to feel wool instead of see it. Yes, they do. Nayeli smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of the lips, but it transformed her face. Her great-nephew helped her back onto the wagon. The horses started forward, wheels creaking, dust rising. Kaya watched until the wagon disappeared over the ridge. She turned back to the barn. The shuttles had resumed their rhythm. Tack, tack, tack. 3 voices woven together, building something that would outlast them all. Kaya walked inside, stopped beside Amma's loom. The girl had made a mistake, a loose thread near the selvage, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Kaya reached down, took Amma's hands in her own, guided them to the error. Feel it. Amma closed her eyes, her fingers moved across the weave. Searching. Yes. Good. Now fix it. Kaya stepped back. The shuttle clicked, the weft beat home. Outside, the sun touched the horizon. Gold light flooded through the windows, catching the drying wool. The polished looms, the framed eagle, watching from the wall. The 3 girls worked on, hands moving, threads weaving, patterns emerging row by row. Kaya stood in the doorway and listened to the sound of the shuttles. There's a weight that settles in the chest after a story like this. Not sadness. Exactly. Something quieter. Something that feels like recognition. Many of us have held something in our hands that others dismissed, a dream. A skill. A piece of ourselves we were told had no value. Some of us carried it anyway. In secret. In the dark hours when no one was watching. Some of us are still carrying it now, and perhaps you know what it is to work without applause, to build something beautiful in a room where no one believes you can, to wait for the moment when what you've made finally speaks for itself. That kind of patience leaves marks on the hands, on the heart. It's all right if this story stirred something you thought had settled. It's okay if it reminded you of work left unfinished, or words left unsaid, or someone who never quite saw what you were capable of. Those feelings don't need to be resolved tonight. They're allowed to simply rest, the way Kaya's blanket rests on that wall, complete, but still breathing. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.